I am 61 years old, and for most of my life, I believed love was something simple, something structured, predictable, the kind of thing you could plan for the same way you planned. Retirement or Sunday dinners. Love to me was routine. It was showing up every day, doing what needed to be done, and staying even when it felt easier to walk away. After my divorce, I built my life around that belief. I raised my son Jake mostly on my own. There were no dramatic breakdowns, no wild reinventions of myself, just quiet endurance. I poured everything I had into creating a home that felt safe, stable, reliable. I became dependable. I became careful. And somewhere along the way, I became invisible to myself. I told myself that was strength. If everything stayed in order, if life followed a predictable rhythm, then nothing could catch me off guard again. No sudden heartbreaks, no emotional storms, no unexpected turns. That was the plan. But life has a strange sense of timing. It waits until you've finally exhaled, until you've convinced yourself you're safe. And then it shifts something small, something subtle, something that quietly unravels everything you thought you understood. That Sunday morning began like any other, soft, slow, peaceful. The kind of morning where the world feels paused, and you don't feel rushed to be anywhere or anyone. Sunlight filtered gently through the lace curtains in my bedroom, casting soft patterns across the walls. The air felt warm, still holding onto the comfort of early morning quiet. I had just stepped out of the shower, wrapping myself in my favorite robe. It was pale blue, worn from years of washing, the fabric softened by time. I had owned it longer than I cared to admit, but I couldn't bring myself to replace it. It carried a kind of comfort no new thing ever could. The bathroom mirror was fogged up from the steam. I lifted my hand and wiped a small circle clear with the edge of my palm. For a moment, I just looked at myself. Not in the way people glance at their reflection before leaving the house. Not checking for flaws or fixing details, just looking, really looking. And what I saw wasn't just age. It was exhaustion. Not the kind sleep fixes, something deeper. The kind that settles into your eyes after years of being everything for everyone else. The kind that builds quietly over time, unnoticed, until one day it becomes part of who you are. I reached for a towel and gently patted my face dry. That's when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant, almost uncertain. "Mom?" Jake's voice. It caught me off guard. He wasn't supposed to be here this early. The night before, he had texted me saying he might stop by to drop off some gardening tools he had borrowed. I assumed he meant sometime in the afternoon, not 9:30 in the morning. "Just a minute!" I called back, my voice steady, though my heart gave a small, unexpected jump. I tightened my robe slightly and walked to the door, opening it just a crack. And there he was. Jake, standing in the hallway, looking exactly the same, and yet not. There was something about him that morning, something I couldn't immediately place. "Hey," he said softly. His eyes moved over me quickly, not in judgment, but in concern, like he was checking if I was all right. "You got a minute?" I opened the door wider. "Of course. What's wrong?" He stepped back slightly, shaking his head. "Nothing's wrong. I was just nearby earlier than I thought, and figured I'd drop these off before I forgot again." He held up the small crate of gardening tools. It should have been a simple moment, ordinary, but it wasn't. There was something in his eyes. Not worry exactly. Something deeper. Something unsettled. I stepped aside, letting him in. "Come in!" He walked past me into the house, setting the crate down on the kitchen table with unusual care, as if it were fragile. I followed him, my damp hair brushing lightly against the back of my neck. "Jake," I said gently, "what's going on?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood there, shifting his weight slightly, rubbing his jaw the way he always did when something was on his mind. Finally, he exhaled. "I had a dream last night." Something in my chest tightened. "About your dad." That caught me off guard. Jake rarely talked about his father. They had made peace before his father passed, but it had always been distant, complicated, not something he revisited often. "Oh," I said quietly. "What about him?" Jake pulled out a chair and sat down. Leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table, his gaze dropped to the wooden surface, tracing invisible patterns in the grain. "It was strange," he said slowly. "We were in the old house, the one we lived in before everything changed." I nodded, saying nothing. In the dream, he was in the backyard. But he looked younger, not how I remember him, younger, like before things got difficult. Jake paused, swallowing, and he said something to me. I felt my breath catch. What did he say? Jake finally looked up at me. Tell your mom the truth. The words settled into the room like something heavy. The truth about what? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know. Silence filled the space between us. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. Small, ordinary sounds that suddenly felt louder than usual. I woke up, he continued, his voice quieter now. And I couldn't shake the feeling. Like I needed to come here. Like something needed to be said, even if I don't fully understand it. I moved to sit across from him. Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand gently over his. Jake, you can tell me anything. He flinched. Not dramatically. Just a small reaction. But I felt it. I don't even know how to start, he admitted. It's not bad, I promise. It's just confusing. I waited. He took a breath, then asked something unexpected. When you were younger, before Dad, did you ever feel like there was a version of you that never got to exist? The question caught me completely off guard. I blinked. What do you mean? Like, a version of you that was freer, he said. Someone who didn't always have to be strong. Someone who didn't carry everything all the time. Something inside me shifted. A memory, a feeling, a quiet, buried truth I hadn't touched in years. All the time, I admitted softly. Jake's expression softened. I think that's what I saw in the dream, he said. Not you as Mom. Just you. I didn't know what to say. There was something deeply intimate in the way he said it. Not inappropriate, not wrong, but deeply personal. Like he was seeing something in me that no one had noticed in a very long time. I want to know that version of you, he added gently. If you'd let me. The air in the room felt different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't quite name. I swallowed. I don't know where to start, I whispered. He gave a small, almost sad smile. Maybe we start with coffee. And just like that, something shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. I stood up and moved toward the kitchen, filling the kettle with water. My hands moved through familiar motions, but I was aware of something unusual. They were trembling, just slightly. I ignored it, focused on the routine. Water, kettle, stove. But inside, something was stirring. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like just someone's mother. I felt seen. And I didn't know what to do with that. Jake stayed longer than I expected. Coffee turned into toast. Toast turned into conversation. And conversation turned into something deeper than anything we had shared before. At some point, I found myself pulling out an old photo album from the living room. I'm not even sure why. Maybe because it felt like opening a door to the version of myself he had asked about. He followed me in quietly, holding his mug, his eyes drifting over the photographs on the mantel. He picked one up, a picture of me in my 30s, holding him as a baby. You look different here, he said. I sat down slowly. I barely remember that version of me. He placed the photo down carefully. You were beautiful, he said after a moment. I felt my cheeks warm. That was a long time ago. He looked at me, steady and certain. It still matters. I didn't respond, because I didn't know how. But something inside me heard him, and something inside me woke up. That day didn't feel like anything extraordinary on the surface. Just a quiet Sunday. Just a conversation between a mother and her son. But beneath it, something had shifted. Something had begun. And I had no idea where it would lead. Jake stayed longer than I expected. What began as a simple visit, just coffee, just a quick drop-off of gardening, tools slowly stretched into something neither of us seemed ready to end. Time moved differently that morning, softer, slower, like the world outside had agreed to give us space. We sat in the living room, the old photo album open between us. Dust and faint lavender rose from its pages as we turned them one by one. Each photograph felt like a doorway, not just to the past, but to pieces of myself. I had carefully folded away and stored somewhere deep, out of reach. Jake leaned closer, his shoulder nearly brushing mine as he studied a picture of me in a yellow sundress, laughing at something just outside the frame. I've never seen you like this, he said quietly. I traced the edge of the photograph with my finger. I don't think anyone has in a long time. He didn't respond right away. His silence wasn't empty. It felt thoughtful, intentional. You look free, he added. That word settled into me. Free. I let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. I used to be, I said, before life got complicated. Jake turned his head slightly, his eyes searching my face. What changed? I leaned back against the couch, folding my hands loosely in my lap. Everything, I said simply. Marriage, responsibility, you. He frowned slightly at that. Me? I shook my head gently. Not in a bad way, I clarified. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. But being a mother, it changes you. It has to. I paused, choosing my words carefully. You don't get to be careless anymore. You don't get to think only about yourself. You become someone steady, someone dependable, someone who puts everything else second. Jake looked down at the album again. And you never got to go back? He asked. I smiled faintly. There's no going back, Jake. Life doesn't work like that. Another silence followed, but this one felt different, deeper, not uncomfortable, just full. Full of things we were both beginning to understand, but hadn't quite figured out how to say. After a while, Jake closed the album gently and set it aside. I think I spent most of my life seeing you as unshakable, he admitted. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Unshakable? Yeah, he said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Like nothing could really get to you. Like you always had everything under control. I let out a soft, tired chuckle. That's funny. Why? Because I was just very good at hiding it. He looked at me surprised. Hiding what? I hesitated. Then, for reasons I didn't fully understand, I answered honestly. Everything. The word lingered between us. Jake sat back slowly, absorbing it. I never knew that, he said. I didn't want you to, I replied. You were a child. You deserved to feel safe. And now? He asked quietly. I met his gaze. Now you're not a child anymore. Something passed between us in that moment. Something subtle, but undeniable. It wasn't just acknowledgement. It was a shift, a recognition. He wasn't the little boy who needed protecting, and I wasn't just the mother who did the protecting. We sat there, looking at each other, both aware that something had changed, but neither of us rushing to define it. Jake broke the silence first. You know what I remember most from when I was a kid? He said. I shook my head. You always knew things, he continued, before I said them, before I even understood them myself. I smiled softly. That's what mothers do. No, he said, shaking his head. It was more than that. It was like you could feel everything, like you were always tuned into me. His words stirred something deep inside me. A memory. Late nights sitting beside his bed when he was sick, holding his hand when he had nightmares, knowing when something was wrong, even when he insisted it wasn't. I paid attention, I said quietly. Jake leaned back, his eyes drifting toward the window. I think I took that for granted, he admitted. That's what kids do, I said gently. It's not your fault. He nodded slowly, but his expression didn't ease. If anything, it grew more serious. There's something else, he said after a moment. I felt my chest tighten slightly. What is it? He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of care. Like he was choosing his words carefully, aware that they mattered. I've been feeling disconnected, he said finally. From what? Everything. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. My job, my friends, even the people I date. It all feels empty, like I'm just going through the motions. I listened without interrupting. And when I woke up this morning, he continued, after that dream, the only place I felt like I needed to be was here. His eyes met mine again. With you. The honesty in his voice hit me harder than I expected. I know that might sound strange, he added quickly. It doesn't, I said softly. Because it didn't. Not really. What he was describing wasn't something inappropriate or wrong. It was something human. A need for connection. For understanding. For something real. I think I've been looking for something I already had, he said. What do you mean? You, he answered simply. I blinked, caught off guard. Not you as my mother, he clarified quickly. I mean, you as a person. The way you understand things. The way you listen. The way you see people. My throat tightened slightly. I don't think I ever realized how rare that is, he said. I looked down at my hands. They were older now, lined with years of work, of care, of quiet sacrifices. I don't even know if I'm still that person, I admitted. Jake shook his head immediately. You are. I looked up at him. His certainty was unwavering. You just forgot, he added. The simplicity of that statement caught me off guard. Forgot. Not lost. Not gone. Just forgotten. Something about that idea felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. Because if he was right, then that version of me was still there, somewhere, waiting. We sat in silence again. But this time it felt softer, warmer. like we had stepped into a space that didn't require explanations or labels. Just presence. After a while, Jake stretched slightly, letting out a small breath. "You know," he said casually, "I almost didn't knock this morning." I turned to him. "Why not?" He shrugged. "I guess I was nervous." "Nervous?" I echoed. "Yeah," he said. "I thought maybe you'd open the door and I'd just see Mom." I frowned slightly. "And that would have been a bad thing?" "No," he said quickly. "Just familiar, safe, predictable." He paused. "But I think part of me didn't want predictable." That made my heart skip. "What did you want?" I asked quietly. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he answered. "Something real." The room felt very still. Outside, a faint breeze stirred the leaves in the yard. Inside, everything felt suspended. Neither of us spoke. Because there wasn't anything to say. Not yet. And maybe that was the point. Some things don't need to be rushed. Some moments aren't meant to be defined right away. They're meant to be felt, to be understood slowly, to unfold in their own time. Jake stood up eventually, walking toward the kitchen. "I should probably get going soon," he said. But his tone didn't match the words. It lacked urgency, like he wasn't quite ready to leave. "Stay a little longer," I said before I could stop myself. He turned back to me. A small smile touched his lips. "Okay." And just like that, he stayed. A little longer. And so did the feeling. That quiet, unspoken shift between us. Growing, changing, becoming something neither of us fully understood yet, but neither of us wanted to walk away from. Jake didn't leave that afternoon. Even after the conversation slowed, even after the photo album was closed and set aside, something kept him there. Or maybe it kept both of us there. Time had softened into something unstructured. The usual rhythm of the day, lunch, chores, small routines felt distant, almost irrelevant. Instead, we moved through the house slowly, like two people rediscovering a familiar place from a completely different perspective. At some point, I found myself in the kitchen again, slicing bread for toast we didn't really need. Jake leaned against the counter across from me, arms loosely folded, watching me in a way that felt different, not uncomfortable, just aware. "You always do that the same way," he said. I glanced up. "What?" "Everything," he replied. "The way you move, the way you set things down. It's like you've practiced being steady your whole life." I gave a small smile. "Maybe I have." He tilted his head slightly. "Does it ever get tiring?" The question landed deeper than I expected. I paused, the knife still in my hand, considering it. "Yes," I said finally. The honesty surprised even me. Jake nodded, like he had expected that answer. I figured. I set the knife down and brushed the crumbs off the counter, more out of habit than necessity. "It becomes part of you," I continued. "You don't even notice it after a while. You just keep going." "And if you stopped?" he asked. I looked at him. "Stopped being steady?" "Yeah." I let out a soft breath. "I don't know who I'd be without it." Jake pushed himself off the counter, stepping a little closer. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten slightly. Not from fear, from recognition. We carried our plates to the small dining table, sitting across from each other again. The space between us felt smaller now. Though neither of us had physically moved closer, it was something else, something internal. We ate in silence for a while, but it wasn't the kind that needed filling. It felt companionable, grounded. Jake broke it first. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been? Like if things had gone differently?" he asked. I looked up from my plate. "All the time." "What do you think it would have been?" He pressed. I leaned back slightly, considering. "I think I would have been lighter," I said. "Less careful, maybe more willing to take risks." Jake smiled faintly. "I can see that." "Can you?" I asked, a hint of curiosity in my voice. "Yeah," he said. "It's still there, under everything." I held his gaze for a moment. "You really believe that?" "I know it," he said simply. There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain, that certainty affected me, more than it should have. After we finished eating, Jake insisted on helping clean up. It was a small thing, something he had done countless times before. But today it felt different, more intentional, more present. We stood side by side at the sink, passing dishes back and forth. Our hands brushed once, just briefly, but the contact lingered longer than it should have. Not physically, but somewhere deeper. Neither of us mentioned it. Instead, we continued as if nothing had happened. But something had. I could feel it. Later we moved back into the living room. The afternoon light had shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. The warmth of the morning had softened into something quieter, more reflective. Jake stretched out slightly on the couch, his head resting back, eyes half closed. "You know," he said after a moment, "when I was younger, I thought you had everything figured out." I let out a small laugh. "That's a dangerous assumption." He smiled. "Yeah, I realize that now." I sat in the armchair across from him, watching him for a moment before speaking. "I didn't have it figured out," I said. "I just didn't have the option not to." He opened his eyes, looking at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when you're responsible for someone else, you don't get to fall apart," I explained. "You don't get to say, 'I don't know what I'm doing.' You just do it anyway." Jake studied me quietly. "That must have been hard." "It was," I admitted. "But it was also necessary." He nodded slowly. "I think I'm just starting to understand that." A quiet settled over us again, but this one felt heavier. Not uncomfortable, just filled with awareness. Jake sat up slightly, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "There's something I've been trying to figure out," he said. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. "What is it?" He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "When I'm here with you, I feel more like myself than I do anywhere else." I didn't interrupt. "I don't feel like I have to prove anything," he continued. "Or pretend, or be something I'm not." His eyes met mine. "And that's rare." I swallowed, my hands resting still in my lap. "That's what home is supposed to feel like," I said softly. He shook his head slightly. "It's more than that." The way he said it made my breath catch. Not because of what he meant, but because of how deeply he felt it. I looked down for a moment, gathering my thoughts. "I think we both built our lives around being what other people needed," I said slowly. Jake nodded. "Yeah, and maybe now, we're both realizing there's more to us than that." He leaned back slightly, considering my words. "That sounds right." We sat with that for a while, letting it settle, letting it exist without trying to define it too quickly. Because whatever this was, it wasn't simple. It wasn't something that could be labeled or explained in a single conversation. It was layered, complex, and quietly powerful. As the afternoon turned into early evening, the light outside dimmed and the house grew quieter. Jake checked the time on his phone, then looked back at me. "I should probably head out soon," he said. There was that word again. Probably. Not definite. Not certain. I nodded slowly. "Okay." But neither of us moved. Not right away. Instead, we stayed where we were, caught in that same unspoken hesitation. Like leaving would mean breaking something neither of us fully understood yet. Jake stood first, slowly, deliberately. I followed a moment later, walking with him toward the front door. The air between us felt different now. Not tense, but charged, full of things neither of us had said. He reached for the door, then paused, turning back to me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, without thinking too much about it, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. It was a simple hug, something we had done countless times before. But this one felt different, stronger, longer, more aware. Jake hesitated for just a fraction of a second before returning it, his arms tightening slightly around me. I could feel his breath against my shoulder, steady, warm, and for a moment everything else faded. The years, the roles, the expectations, all of it. There was just this connection, real, unfiltered. And when we finally pulled apart, something had shifted again, subtle, but undeniable. Jake looked at me, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. "I'll call you," he said quietly. I nodded. "Okay." He opened the door, stepping out onto the porch. But before he left completely, he paused, like he wanted to say something more, something important. But instead, he just gave a small nod and walked away. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, listening to the quiet, feeling the echo of that moment settle into the space around me and into me, because something had changed, not in a way I could fully explain, but in a way I could feel deeply. And as I turned back into the house, the stillness felt different. Not empty, not lonely, just waiting, like something had begun. And there was no going back to the way things were before. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the soft glow of the lamp casting quiet shadows along the walls. The house felt too still. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, it amplifies everything inside your mind. Every word from the day replayed itself. Every pause, Every look, every feeling I hadn't fully allowed myself to examine. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket slightly closer, as if that could ground me. But it didn't. My thoughts kept circling back to the same place. Not confusion, not fear, something more complicated than that. Awareness. For years, my life had been structured around certainty, around knowing my role, my place, my purpose. I was a mother, a provider, the steady one, the reliable one. But today had cracked something open, not in a destructive way, in a revealing way. Jake hadn't brought chaos into my life. He had brought honesty, and honesty has a way of making everything else feel incomplete. I sat up slowly, letting out a quiet breath. The clock beside my bed read 2:07 a.m. Too late to call it night, too early to call it morning. That strange in-between space where thoughts feel louder than they should. I slipped out of bed and walked barefoot down the hallway into the kitchen. The floor was cool beneath my feet, grounding in a way nothing else had been. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out into the dark backyard. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same, and maybe that was the point. My phone buzzed softly on the counter, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced down. Jake. A message. Are you awake? My heart gave a small, unexpected reaction. Not panic, not anxiety, just awareness. I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. Yeah. The reply came almost instantly. Me too. I exhaled slowly, my fingers resting lightly against the phone. Then another message appeared. Can I come over? I hesitated, just for a second, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I understood the weight of it, of what it meant, of what this moment was. Then I typed, the door's unlocked. 10 minutes later I heard it. The soft click of the front door. Footsteps. Familiar, but somehow different now. Jake stepped into the kitchen. His hoodie slightly unzipped. His hair tousled like he had been running his hands through it. I didn't mean to bother you, he said quietly. You're not, I replied. And that was the truth. Not even a little. He pulled out a chair at the table and sat down. His hands clasped loosely in front of him. I sat across from him again, just like that morning. But everything felt different now. The world outside was asleep. The house was wrapped in stillness, and whatever this was between us felt more exposed in the quiet. I've been thinking, he said after a moment. Me too. He nodded, like he expected that. I feel like I crossed some kind of line today, he admitted. I didn't respond immediately, because I had felt it too. Not a physical line, something less defined, more internal. I don't think you crossed it, I said finally. I think we just saw it. He looked at me, considering that. Yeah, he said softly. That feels right. Silence settled between us again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt necessary, like we were both choosing our next words carefully. I don't want to confuse you, he said, or make things harder for you. You're not, I said. He let out a small breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I don't understand why being here with you feels more real than anything else in my life right now. His honesty didn't shock me anymore. It resonated. I think it's because there's no pretending here, I said. No expectations. No roles we have to perform. He nodded slowly. That's exactly it. I leaned back slightly, my hands resting in my lap. For a long time, I lived my life based on what I was supposed to be, I continued. A wife, then a mother. Always something for someone else. Jake listened quietly. And I think, somewhere along the way, I stopped being anything for myself. The words felt heavy, but true. He leaned forward slightly. You don't have to do that anymore. I met his gaze. I know, I said. But knowing something and living it are two different things. He smiled faintly. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out too. Another pause. But this one felt softer, like we were finding common ground. Not as mother and son, but as two people trying to understand themselves. I don't want to lose this, Jake said suddenly. The words hung in the air. You won't, I replied gently. But I also don't want to misunderstand it, he added. I nodded. That's the important part. We sat there for a long moment, both aware that this conversation mattered more than any we'd had before, because this was where things could go wrong, or where they could become something stronger, something healthier. Jake, I said carefully, what you're feeling, it's not wrong. Relief flickered across his face. But it needs to be understood for what it actually is, I continued. He listened closely. You've been feeling disconnected, searching for something real, Something honest, I said. And you found that here, with me. Because this is where you've always felt safe. He nodded. That makes sense. It's not about replacing anything in your life, I added. It's about recognizing what you've been missing and finding it in the right places. Jake leaned back slightly, processing that. So this is about connection, he said. Yes, I said softly. Real connection. Not confusion. Not blurred lines. Not something unspoken and undefined. But something clear. Something grounded. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. I think I needed to hear that. I think I needed to say it, I admitted. A small, quiet understanding settled between us. The kind that doesn't erase what happened, but gives it shape. Gives it meaning. After a while, Jake smiled faintly. You know, I don't think I've ever talked to you like this before. Me neither, I said. And I don't want it to stop, he added. It won't, I assured him. Because it wouldn't. This wasn't something fragile. It wasn't something dangerous. It was something real. And real things, when handled with care, don't break. They grow. Jake stood up slowly, stretching slightly. I should let you get some rest, he said. I stood as well. Probably a good idea. We walked together toward the door. The same path. The same quiet house. But everything felt different now. Clearer, lighter. When we reached the door, he paused again. But this time, there was no hesitation. No uncertainty. Just understanding. He pulled me into a hug. And I hugged him back. It felt familiar. But also renewed. Grounded in something deeper than routine. When we pulled apart, he looked at me with a small, genuine smile. Good night, he said. Good night, Jake. He stepped outside, the cool air drifting in briefly before the door closed behind him. And just like that, the house was quiet again. But not the same kind of quiet. This time it felt peaceful. I stood there for a moment, then turned and walked back inside. Back to my room. Back to myself. Because that was the real shift, wasn't it? Not what had happened between us, but what had awakened within me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be just one thing. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just the strong one. I wasn't just the dependable one. I was me, a person still capable of growth, still capable of being seen, still capable of change. I lay back down in bed, pulling the blanket over me. And this time, when I closed my eyes, sleep came easier. Not because everything was figured out, but because it didn't need to be. Some things aren't meant to be solved all at once. Some things are meant to be understood slowly, gently, over time. And as I drifted off, one thought settled quietly in my mind. Not everything that shakes you is meant to break you. Some things are meant to wake you up. And maybe, just maybe, this was one of them.